For this award. It's truly an honor to be recognized by my peers, especially peers in an organization that feels like family. And I do have family here. Of course, my better half, Allison Parsons, is here. And her daughter, Anna, is here. This is probably Anna's 5th ALAR. Before she entered kindergarten, she was a regular attendee. But, you know, she had to start going to school. So now Anna's a 6th grader in public schools in Fairfax, Virginia. She also here are my parents, Greg and Sally Parsons. They're first timers. Since Anna was in kindergarten, they have come to Virginia from Kentucky to watch Anna, so both Allison and I can attend this conference that we value so much. But because this year we're in Orlando, they joined us here so they could enjoy SeaWorld and Disney and this talk. All right, so let's get down to business. When I was in college, I ran over a cow. In my car. No, it was not on purpose. Yes, it was already dead. So you see, most weekends I would drive 30 miles home from college and I would work at a restaurant. I would visit with my folks. My mom would kindly do my laundry while I was serving tables and bartending. And then I would drive back on Sunday. So one Sunday afternoon, as I was heading back to Center College in Danville, Kentucky, I got to a place where the road went from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. So I was changing lanes. And as a safe driver, I turned on my blinker, I checked my side mirror, and then I gave a look over my shoulder. All clear, I began to merge. And when my eyes returned to the road, there's a full-size dairy cow laying in the middle of the road directly in front of me. I had no time to react, so I literally ramped this cow. So just to be clear, this is not an actual photo of what happened that day. But it's pretty darn close to what it was. Just imagine a 1994 Buick Regal instead of the General Lee. And at this point, I know what you're thinking. He's spending a lot of time on this cow. But if you hang in there, I promise I'll move us along very Anna can tell you that I got dad jokes for days. So, back to the cow. Remarkably, there was minimal damage to my car. I needed an alignment, and the mechanic said there was a lot of fur on the undercarriage. But otherwise, the car was fine. My point here is that I had the best of intentions when I was looking over my shoulder to switch lanes. That's exactly what Greg Parsons taught me to do in my driving lessons, but that didn't prevent me from running over an object in the middle of the road. Indeed, the good intention may have caused the negative outcome. And that's sort of how I've come to see the science of reading movement. Policymakers passing science of reading legislation, coaches promoting science of reading policies, and teachers embracing the science of reading movement, the science of reading movement, all have the best of intentions. I've realized this after working with local schools, school board members, state departments of education, parents, fellow educators. They've been told by multiple authoritative sources that the United States is in a reading crisis. And it's in a reading crisis because reading instruction is not aligned with current research. It's not aligned with the science. If that was the information I was provided, then passing legislation or supporting a curriculum aligned with the science of reading, those are completely logical things to do. And that is why these laws, now in 40 states in the District of Columbia, are being passed, often unanimously, in their state senates and houses. But when we dig deeper into these claims, we encounter some difficulties. So let's take a look. First of all, is there a reading crisis? Let's look at the data that everyone references to establish a reading crisis, the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the nation's report card. Here you can see that since 1992, reading achievement on the NAEP has remained stagnant, ranging from 217 to 223 over the last 20 years. And this was a period during which the population of students in the United States has changed dramatically. Now, I'm not suggesting that I'm satisfied with these results, but it doesn't appear to me that balanced literacy caused a dire reading crisis in the country. The only decline I see over the last 2 decades is from 2019 to 2022. Does anyone have any ideas as to why there might have been a drop between 2019 and 2022?
Rhymes with schmandemic?
Schmovid?
Schmovid.
So, the call for legislating the science of reading goes something like this. Nearly 2/3 of students are reading below the proficient level. Now, this is a true statement based upon NAEP, and it sounds pretty dire. But we need to know what proficient means to genuinely understand that statement. So let's unpack NAEP levels. 3 ALER scholars, David Rankin, George Ruby, Vicki Risco, recently wrote an excellent analysis of the science of reading movement in Teachers College Record. They demonstrated that the categories of performance below basic, proficient, and advanced carry very little meaning. They wrote, the cut scores used to define these categories were set arbitrarily by a small group of hand-picked, politically appointed experts, reportedly against the recommendations of psychometricians who have been contracted to advise the development of this approach, but who were overruled when they argued against doing it at all. There's a second quote from Diane Ravitch, who is a member of the National Assessment Governing Board that oversees the NAEP. And she stated, advanced is truly superb performance, which is like getting an A+. Proficient is akin to a solid A. Basic is akin to a B or a C. And below basic is where we really need to work. After learning this, I was gobsmacked. So I called a buddy of mine. One of the benefits of living in the greater DC area, you meet lots of people who work for the government, and this gentleman is a statistician for the Department of Education. And he works with NAEP. So he explained to me that NAEP is designed to be a challenging assessment, and that it is not designed to be aligned with grade level reading, and he confirmed that the cut scores do not hold any inherent meaning in and of themselves. The levels should not be used as they are currently being used in reading. Therefore, a more accurate statement would be nearly 2/3 of students are adequately comprehending difficult reading material. That's a little different than what we're being told by the media. And yet NAEP scores are being used to show a catastrophic reading crisis. Are we being sold a story? Nonetheless, most of us live in states that have passed science of reading legislation. So what exactly do science of reading policies include? Science of reading legislation tends to include teacher preparation guidelines, teacher professional development guidelines, high-quality instructional materials, required assessments, and intervention for students not progressing as expected. On the surface, I have no qualms with any of these. I fully support increasing teacher knowledge through high-quality teacher education and professional development. I've come to appreciate the importance of a high-quality curriculum, and we've long known that the importance of assessment and intervention for students not making adequate progress. I agree that if we did these things, promoted teacher knowledge, adopted quality curricula, and regularly assessed students' progress to guide intervention, we would be supporting students' reading advancement. How these aspects of reading instruction are being implemented, though, is not always, or even often, aligned with the research on how people learn. So, in particular, I have 3 scruples with these policies and how they are being implemented. Scruple number 1 is the science of reading messaging. Proponents of the science of reading have blamed teachers and teacher educators for this supposed reading crisis, suggesting that they're resistant to change and clinging to disproven approaches. Our friend Emily Hanford said, "Many educators don't know the science, and in some cases actively resist it. Most teachers nationwide are not being taught reading science in their teacher preparation programs. Ooh. Because many deans and faculty of education and colleges of education either don't know the science or they dismiss it." Natalie Wexler said, "Many teachers have never learned how to teach reading using the method that science has determined to be effective. Educators assume phonics is boring and will kill children's love of reading. Teachers are often emotionally invested in the approach they're using." None of this is rooted in scientific evidence, but they're making these bold claims, and these are in highly reputable outlets. Emily Hanford was published in NPR, National Public Radio. Wexler's appeared in, I believe, the New York Times. And all I have to say is thank goodness we have these media sensationalists to show us the way. Teachers are the lifeblood of the educational enterprise, and they should be compensated and respected accordingly. I genuinely thought that after COVID, society would have a more positive view of teachers and the critical role they play, not only in societal advancement, but also day-to-day life. By a show of hands, was anyone's life impacted by Zoom school for their children? Why it is in vogue to degrade teachers who were working tirelessly with our nation's most precious commodity is beyond me. My second scruple, which is related to the first, is the effort to teacher-proof the curriculum. Many of these policies require teachers to teach to fidelity, often reading from a script. The Virginia Literacy Act, for example, forbids teachers from deviating from approved curriculum or from using additional resources. This is problematic because while the scientific research base tells us a lot about knowledge and skills that students need to read, it tells us very little about how best to teach reading, particularly dosage, how much, and differentiation, for whom. So, states are approving curricula because teachers can't be trusted, because they're holding on to outdated or disproven approaches. So we're going to adopt curriculum that's aligned with the science of reading and make teachers follow it to fidelity. But folks, I'm here to tell you it's not going to work. First, it never has. Remember the first grade studies back in 1967? They demonstrated that it's the teacher, not the program, that matters in teaching kids to read. 1967, federal investigation. What about reading first? Anyone remember reading first? 2001, $1 billion per year federal program that after 5 years of fidelity to scripted instruction, reading instruction, demonstrated no gains in third graders' reading achievement. But here we are again. But it's also not going to work because kids are different. Does anyone in here have more than one child? Are they the same? And they often share DNA. Of course they're different. And at the same time, we know that learning to read requires the complex coordination of knowledge, skills, and strategies. Expecting a class of 25 students' needs to be met by a single curriculum is completely illogical. In this situation, kids suffer because power is given to the curriculum instead of the teacher, who knows them and could adapt their instruction to meet students' needs. Back in the late 90s and 2000s, Michael Presley and other colleagues engaged in the exemplary teacher studies. Who remembers those? The logic there was to identify the teachers who were exemplary and then go see what they're doing. Because they couldn't do the flip. They couldn't prove the instructional strategies and make teachers do it. They said there's something special about teachers. Let's go see what those exemplary teachers are doing. Among other characteristics, these studies in first grade, fourth grade, and others consistently identified teacher adaptability or teacher responsiveness as a characteristic of highly effective reading teachers. For that reason, several colleagues and I have studied teacher adaptations in reading for years. Many of those colleagues are in the room: Roya, Julie, Allison, Jackie, Amy. This research has cataloged how and why teachers adapt and has emerging evidence that teacher responsiveness is associated with improved student outcomes. Recently, in the special issue of Reading Research Quarterly devoted to the science of reading, Margaret Vaughn, Dixie Massey, and I presented the case for the importance of adaptive teaching within the science of reading. If anyone is interested in learning more about how these two schools of thought can work together, they are not mutually exclusive. And indeed, if we strove to move towards this sort of approach of aligning the science of reading with adaptive teaching, we'd have a lot better path ahead of us. All right, scruple number 3. I'm dumbfounded by the lack of attention given to reading motivation in the science of reading movement. And this oversight's ironic because the science of reading movement stakes its authority on scientific research. But it's ignoring an entire subset of reading research that has strong evidence for the importance of motivation in learning to read. Joy Erickson and I point out this striking omission in a recent article in Phi Delta Kappan, appropriately titled, "Where's Motivation in the Science of Reading?" And longtime ALER member Linda Gambrell, whom we sadly lost this year, reminded us here at ALER, year after year, that motivation matters. Toast, or Toasty, as I tend to say, Toast and her colleagues demonstrated this in a recent meta-analysis which found moderate relationships between motivation and reading at all grade levels, K through 12. They also found evidence that motivation and reading achievement have a reciprocal relationship. Therefore, taking a dual-pronged focus to reading instruction that gives students the knowledge and skills they need and that attends to students' motivation is optimal because enhancements in one supports enhancements in the other. It's like supercharging your instruction or supercharging your intervention. Toasty and colleagues also point out this curious omission of motivation from presentations of learning to read. They conclude in their meta-analysis published in the Review of Educational Research, although most researchers agree that motivation influences student performance, models of reading development generally fail to consider motivation or other social-emotional processes. I want to begin this section by acknowledging how frustrating this situation is. Since the science of reading movement really began about 5 years ago, I've gone through various stages of reaction. First, I dismissed it. Oh, this again. Then I was angry. Who the hell is this journalist to tell us how to most effectively teach reading? But I've come to a place where I see a path forward. And it begins with understanding good intentions. I made a big deal about good intentions and unintended consequences at the beginning of this talk because I believe that's a central assumption to move forward in a positive and productive way. My earlier stages of dismissal and anger lead inevitably to division and an us versus them mentality that essentially precludes positive advancement and ensures unproductive argument. While those of us in the room know that the science of reading movement is flawed, it's heartening to know that there is a shared goal among stakeholders. I have to assume that even the most off-base science of reading proponents are doing what they are doing because they think it's the right thing to do When I let go of dismissal and anger, I see that research is valued now more than previously. Research is king right now, and that falls in our court. It's something to celebrate. I'm a firm believer that policy and practice should be guided by high-quality research. Right now, though, policy implementation is extending beyond research, and this is an opportunity for us to move towards better policy implementation. And I've seen this shift in the science of reading proponents. Back in 2021, I was hearing from teachers that they were forbidden from reading aloud to students because of the science of reading. Instead, they should be focusing on phonics and students should be reading decodables. A year later, I was invited to conduct professional development on interactive read-alouds because of the strong research behind it. I had a similar experience with student talk in the classroom. At first, the focus was so heavy on explicitly teaching phonics that student discussion was discouraged because, it smells like whole language. But they walked that back as well, learning about the powerful research of oral language and reading development, I assume. Last, I'm encouraged because the core of most science of reading legislation is fairly logical. As I argued earlier in this talk, giving teachers more knowledge, adopting high-quality curriculum, and using ongoing assessments to guide intervention are all supported by research, and they are all pervasive aspects of science of reading laws. So as we depart ALER and Orlando and head back to our work in the current literacy landscape, I leave you with the following charge. First, join me in assuming good intentions in the science of reading movement. Instead of getting frustrated with the science of reading advocates and proponents and perpetuating a fabricated reading wars, remember that they are most likely doing what they are doing because they believe it's best for kids. Second, let's stay on top of the research. This is much more difficult than it sounds. Research is being produced at a higher rate than ever before and is published in a wide variety of venues, as science of reading advocates point out: neuroscience, cognitive psychology, educational psychology, brain research. To promote positive change, though, we have to know what the research says and what it doesn't say. So I urge you to set alerts on Google Scholar and on databases so you're notified when publications related to reading acquisition. And then, because of the avalanche of articles you're going to get, just read the abstracts. I found that that's enough to stay abreast of the breadth of research being produced. And you can identify those articles that are really important to your work and your context and what you're doing, and you can read them in their entirety. But staying abreast of what's happening across multiple fields regarding reading is important for us at this stage. Third, make sure you know the law in your area and what it actually entails. As I've noted a couple times now, the laws tend to be pretty innocuous. They're fairly vague. Things go off the rails in how they're being implemented, though. How schools, school systems, school districts, administrators, school boards, how they're interpreting these laws, and then promoting the implementation, which isn't aligned with research at all. And I think this goes back to how the movement's being messaged, with a distrust of teachers who have been doing it wrong forever. But this is where our focus should be. If we know the research, we know the laws, then I encourage you to identify places where implementation in your context is straying from the research and act there. And I genuinely believe that ALER is a great space for us as we attempt to enact this charge together. Let's use this organization as a support for one another, collaborating to stay on top of the research and identify those areas of the science of reading implementation that stray from the science and where we can promote positive change. Thank you for your time.